everyone, to Embroidered Memories. This is an exhibit that features over 750 different Ukrainian Canadian embroidered pillows. We are coming to you live from ACUA here in Edmonton, and we're actually inaugurating the new space that they have, the new gallery space. We're also bringing you this live tour in collaboration with Calgary's Ukrainian Virtual Festival, which you'll be able to see a little bit later if you don't catch us now. I hope you'll be able to join us for the next hour so that I can share some of the details related to this exhibit and about my research related to the Ukrainian Canadian embroidered pillows. This exhibit is the final outcome of the research for my master's thesis in Ukrainian folklore at the University of Alberta. I gathered all these pillows. They were lent to me or donated to the project as I was traveling across Canada from Sidney, Nova Scotia to Sidney, BC. They represent hundreds of thousands of hours of needlework stitched by over 150 artisans between 1920 and the present. The pillows embody many meanings. For some of us, they represent a cultural bond that we have to the Ukrainian homeland and immigrants' experience, an attraction that drives the preservation and conservation instinct. For others, they represent thousands of hours of stitchery and artistic excellence. I started the project by wanting to know the backstory. Who created them? Where did they come from? Where did the patterns come from? And how did they end up on the backs of so many couches in the homes across Canada? Historically, in Ukraine, there's recorded evidence of Ukrainian embroidered pillows that date back to the 1600s. They're always in reference to dowry pillows. And I've got part of the exhibit here represents those kind of dowry pillows that would have existed in Ukraine. They would have been collected by a young woman and gone on with her in her marriage. They represented the wealth of the family. The higher the stack of pillows meant the wealthier you were. Not necessarily wealthy in money, but you would have had a lot of geese to stuff the pillows and a lot of time to be able to embroider on the sides of the pillows. This tradition continues in Ukraine today in many small communities, but it did not actually transfer to Canadian soil, nor did the practice of decorating pillows on the side be very common. But the thoughts of a diary and its meaning did carry on and influence many women. So behind me here is a picture of Anna Zuzak. She is one of the young women who came to Canada in her young teens. And when she came, she was by herself and unmarried. She did meet a Ukrainian man, Ukrainian descent, who she married. However, they were living in Canada during an age when you did not want to kind of show off what your roots were. And she was discouraged from having anything Ukrainian in the home. The other thing was that many of her friends in Ukraine, she corresponded with them, they were getting married and they had dowry pillows. And she felt very badly, she herself did not. So she embroidered her own dowry pillow and kept it with her as a memento of her past and of her Ukrainian roots. Many of the early pioneers, when they came to Canada, came with very little. The embroidered pillows that you see here, the brightly colored ones, would have been a luxury item that they would not have packed in their trunk. I've set up a few trunks here that would represent the size of the trunk that a whole family would have come with. So actually the one on top was my great-grandmother's, and it would have held some important items such as maybe a bolt of cloth that they could have used when they got here, some woven pieces that would have been used for covering benches or walls, and most likely a rushnek that would have been hung on over an icon. However, what they had embroidered decoratively in the way of clothing would have been worn by them, and they would have had very little reference to what embroidery patterns would have been like other than what they brought in their trunks or would have been wearing. These two young women are Alice Prosuk and Katie Perchewski. Alice and Katie were born in Canada in 1918 on the prairies of Saskatchewan. They actually didn't meet until they were in their 90s in the nursing home, and found that they had such similar backgrounds. And when I had a chance to meet them, their backgrounds were so similar they would be able to finish each other's sentences for them. I had a lot of questions for them, what it was like back then. And I noticed that they both loved to embroider, and I asked, did your mother teach you? And Alice immediately answered by saying, my mother had no time to teach me to embroider. She had 300 heads of cabbage to plant and a whole house full of children to look after. If I wanted anything pretty, I had to figure it out myself. And she went on, much like Katie did, the two of them, if they wanted something pretty, something to embroider, they had to find the pattern either from their mother's embroidered blouse or from someone down the road. They would share patterns. And they were both lucky to have elementary school teachers that taught them some of the patterns that were common to an Anglo-Saxon background, because both of their teachers had come from England. Katie and Alice continued to embroider. Both of them lived at Mohila Institute in Saskatoon at different times, and had a chance to meet with Sabella Stitchician, who taught them how to embroider, and continued on into their 90s. And they showed me their latest pieces were on great big plastic canvas, so they could see the holes to be able to embroider, but it was their passion. Now, one of the things I keep referring to is the patterns on sleeves. And one of the pieces in this collection actually shows that off quite well. Here at the beginning, I have a sleeve that was, this particular podushka is on loan to the exhibit, courtesy of Larisa in Toronto, and it is made from two blouse sleeves, from a little girl's sleeve that would cut off and then sewn into together as a keepsake. One of the other pillows that I found in Truro, Nova Scotia, a woman there by the name of Pearl, she had memories of her mother wanting to have pillows back in the 1930s would be matching on the couch. And her mother did not have the finances nor the cloth or materials to make her own decorative pillows. So she cut the sleeves off of her blouse and created two pillows that were on the couch side by side. And afterwards, both of her daughters got to have a pillow from their mother's blouse sleeve. So the stitches that they relied on varied. I have heard that there are over 21 different stitches. The one that I'm showing you right now is a stitch called Yavoriovka from the village of Yavoriv, and it is commonly taught because it's similar to a satin stitch, and many of the patterns you find will be in the Western Ukrainian from the Ivano-Frankivsk area, those earthy, orangey colors. And the patterns are very geometric. The other stitch is that was very common from Western Canada was called nezinka. And nezinka is stitched from the underside, done first in black, and then the colors are filled in. Now there's one particular pillow here, done in nezinka, that's very special to me, and in that it was done by Anna Kureliu. And Anna and Vasily Kureliu actually donated funds to the University of Alberta, to the Cool Folklore Center, for scholarships for graduate studies, and it was on the Kureliu scholarship that I have been able to continue my studies at the University of Alberta. By far the most popular stitch is cross stitch. And here behind me you'll see a whole array of different patterns that are done in cross stitch. Now they may not necessarily have been originally designed in cross stitch, for cross stitch, but because it was a very popular pattern that was taught to young women in Canada, many patterns were translated into cross stitch. There are a couple here that stand out for me personally, and one is that this particular one here was done by my great-grandmother, Anastasia Kozniuk, who came to Canada in 1905, and she and her husband settled in the Willingdon area by a small town called Pruth. And my prababa, my buna, continued to embroider and influenced my baba, who also taught me. The other one here that stands out, that I know the person personally, is this one here at the bottom, was embroidered by Maria Rehor in Nipawin, Saskatchewan. Many of you may know the family through the connection of the Swazdatskys. This pillow is on loan to the exhibit by the Swazdatsky family. And Pani Rehor, I had an opportunity to interview both of her daughters, Anna and Pauline Lysak. And both of them told me about how their mother used embroidery, and especially embroidered pillows, to connect to the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, because every one of her children, great-grandchildren, and grandchildren, she embroidered them a pillow for their wedding. So a very special gift. While I've been on tour with Embroidered Memories, I've been asked many times about some of the traditions related to embroidered pillows. In our Ukrainian culture, we've got pisanke that are very popular, and we've also got rushnike that are popular object or artifact that we find in the home that are associated with religious traditions and different rituals. However, when it comes to pillows, I found very few references as far as traditions go. One of them, though, however, I happened upon when I was visiting the family of Emil Yaranyuk. Emil Yaranyuk pulled out this beautiful pillow here that his mother had specifically embroidered to put out at Christmas time. It was, so on Svetay Vacher, on Christmas Eve, January 6th, the house was usually stripped of everything that was bright and represented things that are colorful. It was Spartan. And then on Christmas morning, this would be one of the first things that she would pull out, this particular pillow. She would put it out as her Christmas pillow. And during that conversation with Emil, his wife Oresia joined in and said, "Oh, I remember my mom had a tradition, and it was at Easter time, and that during Lent, her mother would take everything out of the living room that was bright and beautiful. So then again, to represent the Spartan life that they had come from, to represent simplicity. And then after, on Easter Sunday, all the beautiful pillows would come out onto the couch." So those are two traditions that I found were associated with pillows. Another humorous one is that this particular pillow, in fact, was used by Scott Armstrong in Winnipeg. His Saturday morning tradition as a child was to go over to his baba's and to pull out all of her embroidered pillows and build a fort so that he could watch cartoons. On a little bit sadder note, there is also the tradition of creating pillows that were used at funerals. Now, behind me, there is a slide projection that you'll be able to see when you come to the exhibit that has another 500 different pillows that I collected. And one of the things that I found during my research was that it was very gender specific. A lot of women would be involved in embroidery. It seemed to be predominantly a women's project. However, on the slide projection, there are two representations of pillows from two different men. One is Stan Havrilu from Saskatoon, and Stan is a fanatic when it comes to embroidery. I don't know how many pillows he showed me when I visited his home there. And also, when I was in Sidney, Nova Scotia, Father Roman Dusanowski, he embroidered his own podushka. He had also embroidered his own reze, his vestments, for when he was ordained. And the pillow was something that he could have out all the time to remind him of his background. This particular pillow here, was actually embroidered by Very Reverend Thomas Kovaleshin. His son Dennis and daughter-in-law Donna have lent it to the exhibit. And you can see that the very meticulous detail done by the artisan represents a form of meditation, something to do during quiet time to ease the soul, to quiet the body and the mind. You'll notice that as we're going through the exhibit, there are you'll see many panels of embroidery, and I created them. At first, I wasn't sure how I was going to arrange all the pillows. Should I do them by region, by the type of stitch, by the pattern? And instead of doing that and categorizing them, I decided to hang them in a way that represented Ukrainian Canadians, in that there was a little bit of everything from all across Canada in each of the panels. And that's pretty much how I found it in the homes. You'd walk into a home and you'd find a stitch from Yavorivka, a stitch from Bukovina, different regions of Ukraine, from central Ukraine. They would all be on the back of a couch, making up one complete decorative arrangement. And that's how I've done it as well here on these panels. Some come from 1920s, 1930s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and the present day. Just accumulation of all the wealth of the beauty of the pillows that we've had. So as we go along through the exhibit, I have put up different photographs that remind me of chronologically how things happened in Canada when it came to the development and the modifications of Ukrainian embroidery. And in the interwar years, so between World War I and World War II, a lot of things happened that influenced Ukrainian pillows. The first is that there were Ukrainian women's magazines that came out. In particular, Nova Chata, which was published in Lviv between 1925 and 1939. Also, in 1927, Cheladyn magazine began to be published in Canada, and there was also Good Housekeeping that came up to Canadians from the United States. Nova Chata was a great source for Ukrainian patterns, and so that women that received those magazines in the mail would have probably one new pattern a month that they could copy and use for a pillow pattern. Cheladyn actually did several advertisements and promotions. I remember my Baba was a great Cheladyn fan, and she subscribed to it, and one of the articles was on how you could create and decorate your living room with boudoir pillows, and many of the women wanted to have exactly that, boudoir pillows. And the last was the Good Housekeeping magazine. There's known to have a cover that had a woman wearing embroidery on her blouse, a Ukrainian embroidered blouse. So it made it okay to show off your Ukrainian pride. The other thing that happened in the 1930s was that the Canadian government made it illegal to grow hemp and ret flax for linen. So what happened was that the market opened up, and you had started to have little shops that imported cotton. This particular photo is from the 1950s, and it's from Andrew, Alberta. It's the Romanuk dress shop, and you've got Mrs. Romanuk on the right and her daughters Mary and Jane, and she provided cloth that was already made for the customers in the area. Hemp was traditionally, from Ukraine, very popular and grew well in Canada. However, with the Canadian government legislating and making it illegal, you could no longer grow your own hemp, and you could not ret flax for the same reason, in that they made it illegal to make your own linen. This really impacted not only the actual fibers or the cloth that the embroidery was done on, but they also, you could now buy pre-made threads, the different colors. And I actually have with me here in my pocket, they're similar color, but the two brands that became very popular were Anchor and DMC. And because they had pre-made colors and they were to dye lots, so if you ran out of one color that you really liked, you could add more and go buy the same color. And you didn't have to rely on dyeing your own anymore and getting a variation. It also allowed you to, you could continue a pattern, but also you could do patterns and you could do colors from wherever you liked. One of the things that you'll find in Ukraine that contributed to the regionalization of the different patterns and colors is that the artisans relied on colors that were created from nature, from the different herbs, from the different minerals of a particular area. So from Western Ukraine, from Hutsuzhtina, from Bukovina, whatever grew in that area could provide you with certain colors. And so your colors became very specific to a region. That changed completely in Canada because now you could have every color that you wanted provided to you by DMC or Anchor. And so you were not limited, and it no longer became a regional way of identifying the patterns and the colors. After World War II, we had a third wave of Ukrainians that came to Canada. And they were very different and characteristically so, characterized by the fact that many of those women that came were educated. They had participated in the prosvita sewing circles in Ukraine. They were educated formally in embroidery, the different patterns, the different stitches, the history of them. And when they arrived in Canada, they came with a wealth of knowledge. And there was a little bit of a clash of the waves. So the very first waves that came with very little knowledge of the different regions. They may not have even traveled anywhere within Ukraine to have seen anything outside of their village. But they also, there were already first and second generation artisans born in Canada that would not have been familiar with the different stitches and the different color combinations and different patterns. So this particular photo is a representation. It's of Lyudmila Onofreychuk and her mother Olga Pavlyuk in a displaced persons camp in Germany. Both of them were very knowledgeable in Ukrainian embroidery, and they were put to work in a factory, embroidering souvenirs and little accessories, clothing accessories such as hankies for the public and also for tourists. One of the things that was very popular in North America, and from my childhood memories, and probably for many of yours, is that pillows decorated on the back of the couches. I remember as a teenager going caroling at Christmas time, and so often you'd walk into a home and there was no doubt that the family was of Ukrainian origin. They would have pillows stretched out across the back of the couch, and it would kind of show off the different patterns, but it also represented the different classes, the different embroidery classes that the women had been taking that had been sponsored by the Ukrainian Women's Associations, and the courses were taught by many of the women that had come over after World War II. Now, one of the things that I found interesting, and was part of this exhibit, is that I have set up this couch to show the pillows across the back, but also there is one piece on the wall. Back in the 1950s, Savela Stechyshin wrote a book. It was the first book published about Ukrainian embroidery in Canada, and in it, she argues that Ukrainian embroidery is not a craft, that it's actually an art form. And she had no problems taking a piece of art and framing it and putting it on the wall. So you've got a piece that I've got here up on the wall, and you've also got the ones on the pillows that kind of represent the life that they've actually lived between being a material object that we sleep on to slowly moving up to being represented as a piece of art. Now, Mrs. McKinnon here, unfortunately she recently passed away in Toronto. She was a gem when it came to doing my interviews. She brought out all of her pillows that she has embroidered, and each one was done in a different stitch or incorporated a unique stitch. Her goal in life, she told me, was to learn as many different embroidery stitches as she could. And it was just awesome to hear her different stories about where she was inspired. Something that was interesting to me is that she came over to Canada at 16 and lived in Toronto all her life, but there was a time in the 70s when she attended the Banff School of Fine Arts, had a weaving course, and she met my Baba, and the two of them were weaving partners. So it was exciting for the two of us to cross paths so many years later. Now, the whole practice of showing embroidery and teaching embroidery continued after World War II into the 60s and 70s, and the different patterns and the different stitches were shared by the experts that had come over. And one of the things that I wanted to show in the exhibit was, so often I saw my mom, my Baba, my aunts walk up to a piece of embroidery and flip it over and look at the back. What's so special about the back? And you can see that it represented how technically perfect they had become over the years of embroidery, so that the back and the front looked very good. It not only showed that you were efficient with your time and thought through your patterns, but also one of the women reminded me that she always tried to make it very efficient on the back to save thread, because her family, when they were growing up, could not afford very much thread, and so they tried to use as little as possible on the back. This particular photo is historically very significant in that it represents 4 women who participated in it wasn't a Ukrainian embroidery and ornamental art exhibition. It was one that was held at the Clifton Lake Lodge Folklore and Ornamental Art exhibit just outside of Winnipeg. These 4 women were the judges for what was considered a multicultural event. And the 4 women were, from the right, Mrs. Natyuk. Next to her is Tatiana Koshitz, Mrs. Koshitz. Her husband was choir conductor, well-known choir conductor out of Winnipeg. Next to her, wearing the embroidered hat, was Mrs. Pavlichenko. And on the far left was Mrs. Hnatyshyn from Vegreville, Governor General Ray Hnatyshyn's mother. The 4 of them had been asked to come to Winnipeg to participate as judges in the competition. All 4 of them were actually involved in Ukrainian National Federation in UNO. And that particular federation was known to have hosted many, many different classes across Canada in showing people, young women and young students, how to embroider. Part of this exhibit I felt was really important to set up a little corner that represented the space that many of the people that I interviewed set up for themselves to embroider. So what I have here, I'm going to just walk to the other side, representing a very quiet spot with some embroidery threads, a partially started piece of done in Nesenka, the cover of Savella Stachishyn's first book that was published in 1950, and then a very popular book of patterns published by the Ukrainian Women's Association of Canada in 1958. I found that in many homes, the people had set up a place where they could sit and embroider. All their materials were there. It was quiet. Quite often it was either by the bedside or in a special room or next to the television. But it quite often was a place they went to at the end of the day to relax and to get a feel for sort of to downplay all the hectic part of that had happened during the day, and they could just sit and embroider and finish the day off with a piece of beauty. These particular pillows that are grouped here on the chair are from on loan from the Sembaliuk family in Edmonton. And I have also tucked in here something that I recently found that was my Baba's. And I found that so many others said that they did the same thing. And this is my Baba's scrapbook of embroidery patterns. I haven't really gone through it in detail yet, but you can see how she had taped things together, found pieces that she liked and saved them, and also cut out pieces that showed how she could use them in different ways. Many of the different households and the artisans had this kind of scrapbook of embroidery patterns that they had collected. As we walk past some of the patterns, you can see that there's so much variation. The variety is phenomenal, and when I first started my research, I thought that for sure I would only find 9 or 10 different popular patterns that would be repeated over and over again. Instead, I found hundreds of different variations on a theme, but each one unique, had been personalized either with their favorite colors or done in a shape that was the one that they wanted, or in some cases personalized to the piece of fabric, this piece of scrap fabric that they had found that was left over from something else that they then decorated and made it part of their home. One of the stories that I found that was very popular about these podushke is that many of them were samplers. They were, when they went to a course to learn how to stitch, they created a pillow because it was a small piece that they could embroider and learn the stitch, but also make into something functional. Now, I have in this collection also some smaller pillows, some pin cushions, and they were again samplers in many cases when someone wanted to learn something. There also, I found many stories of how people said, well, when I went to summer camp, or when I belonged to Plast or Soom, the very first thing that we had got to do was either a bookmark or a pin cushion. And quite often the pin cushion became a Mother's Day gift. And so I've included in this collection some little pillows that have been loaned to me for the exhibit. The other story that was very prominent and came out subtly on my tour, and it had to do with these kind of really bright, modern-looking pillows that were very popular in the 1970s. In the 1970s, these particular patterns and pillows were very popular in central and eastern Ukraine. And Ukraine had just started to open up, and it was easier to ship things to Canada. And so families were shipping them either already embroidered or as embroidery kits to their families in Canada. And initially, there was a lot of pride in getting something very authentic from Ukraine. However, there was a little bit of a backlash to that, in that these were created during the Soviet era. And there were some families that felt that these were not authentically Ukrainian, that they must be Soviet. And so they were put on the back burner. They weren't put out on display. There was very little recognition given to them. However, I found it was a wonderful experience in Saskatoon at St. George's Orthodox Church. They have collected pillows that people have not wanted, either through estate sales or people just not feeling that they want to keep them in their own homes after someone has passed away or moved into a nursing home and downsized. So they have a variety of these kind of pillows on all the benches of the church. So when you walk in and you look down from the choir loft, every seat on all the pews are lined with these pillows that had been discarded in some way, but taken in another way. I was cautioned very carefully that there was no problem for me to take photos of all those pillows, but I was not to move them because people had identified a certain spot and pillow that was there for Sunday services, and I wasn't to mix them up. So they were still very special to a lot of people. There's also, during that same time, a wave of embroidery that took on more ornamental patterns that had birds, some had people in them, different scenery, so that as time went on and the different cultures influenced each other, you would get modifications, variations on a theme. Either the emphasis would be on the stitch, the type of, or the coloration. There was even one woman who showed me a pillow that she had done. It was a Bukovinian pillow, originally designed in blacks and reds, and she had done it all in bright orange in the 1970s to match her orange shag rug. So the pillows had different meanings to different people. I found it really interesting that as I toured across Canada, I found some of the pillows were on display in people's homes, but more often they were tucked away and saved. They were heirlooms from a family, and the people wanted them to save them for posterity, respect. However, they weren't exhibiting them very much at that time. As this project has grown, I have found that people are starting to bring them out, dry clean them, and have restuffed them and put them out on display. We're also finding that in the different museums across Canada, they are starting to pull out their collections and identifying them. And we're starting to find who the owners are, the backstory of some of the different pillows. This particular pillow here was embroidered by Olena Laban, and she and her sister came to Canada, her sister Alexandra Laban Chomyak, and the two of them had come via a displaced persons camp in Germany, and while they were there, they continued to embroider the patterns that they knew from Ukraine, but they also started to design and create their own. This pillow is on loan to the exhibit by a friend of mine, Lida Lohola, and it represents some of the many ways that the women really got into the detail in the designing of the patterns and continued that, the teaching of it, the creation of it while they were here in Canada. This grouping here represents, they're all from collections from the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, the Alberta branch, and the Ontario branch. And I know some of these families personally, some of these women who embroidered the pillows. The Ukrainian Museum of Canada, as well as many of the other museums, Osaradok in Winnipeg, the Catholic museums, have all done a wonderful job of preserving our heritage through the preservation of the textiles, such as the pillows, the rushniki, the blouses, and have collected the details about each one. So if you get a chance to visit any of the museums, you'll be able to see pieces where they have researched who made it, where the patterns are from, what they meant to the person possibly, where they came from. And so a really good job. I was really impressed of how the museums across Canada have been preserving the culture, but also teaching and holding classes. To kind of wrap up this tour, there was one interview that I did, and it was back with Alice Prosyuk, one of the two 96-year-olds that I interviewed. And I asked Alice, so Alice, you know, I'm really curious about one thing, and that is I would like to know, where did you get your patterns? And she kind of looked up at the sky and she goes, I don't know. Moi je vais voir. Maybe from God. And that kind of wrapped the whole project up in a nutshell for me, in that we can go out and we can research and interview and ask people about the different projects that they have done as artists, but where do you really get that passion and inspiration from? So many times you can answer, I don't know, moi je vais voir. And so this entire collection here that we've got at ACUA is on display from June 2nd until the 30th. Make time to come and take a look at it. This particular tour will be posted on Facebook, and you'll be able to go back and look at it again. And just take time, and I'm in awe, and I'm sure you will be too, at the hundreds of thousands of hours. And I have to quote my husband, and he's often said when he's looked at a pillow, he goes, I wonder what she was thinking when she was embroidering this, or who she was talking to, or what was the conversation that was happening in the room at this time. These are the questions we will never exactly know, but we can feel the soul of it, the beauty of what might have been happening to them, coming out in the threads on each of these pillows. So to wrap it up, I would like to acknowledge the sponsors of the project. Without them, I could not have made this possible. I could not have traveled across Canada. I could not have collected or put this together. And so the Shevchenko Foundation, the Cool Folklore Center, the Ukrainian Pioneers Association of Alberta, and then the different organizations that hosted the exhibit. There was Osaradak in Winnipeg, St. Vladimir Institute, and Ukrainian Museum of Canada Ontario branch that hosted in Toronto. Here in Edmonton, ACUA, the Alberta Council for the Ukrainian Arts. I also have to thank all the many participants, and I've also have to thank the many artisans who continued with their passion of embroidery, and we are now able to enjoy what they created sometimes 100 years ago. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions, I'm sorry I was not able to take any at this time when we were doing this tour. However, you can direct message me and let me know, and I'll be happy to get back to you whenever possible. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later.